Hi everyone. In this video, I'll walk through some sentence diagrams or grammar trees, and we'll focus our trees on the 5 basic sentence patterns. These patterns are commonly taught to students of English in the Japanese EFL context, and the rules for diagramming are from Larson Freeman and Celsi Murcia's grammar book. This is a pedagogical, not a linguistic grammar, so the rules and conventions may differ somewhat from other grammars. And you'll see the particular sentences we'll be diagramming were generated with the aid of my 2 cats, Hamish and Ruby. These little guys will provide the linguistic stimulus for our diagrams. And these are the 5 basic sentence patterns we will diagram, and we'll go through them one by one, starting with sentence pattern 1, subject verb. So our first SV sentence we will diagram is this one here. They, my cats, slept. And we'll use S to indicate sentence, and all sentences are comprised of a subject and a predicate, abbreviated as follows. Subjects are made up of an obligatory noun phrase, or NP, and in this case, the NP is comprised simply of a pronoun, or pro. And from that, we can generate the surface structure, they. All right, on to the predicate node, which is comprised minimally of an auxiliary element and a verb phrase. Let's start with the auxiliary. This node bundles together a variety of sentence features like tense, aspect, and modality. And if you recall, English modals such as would and should do not take tense. So we have a choice here of either tense or modality. And obviously, this sentence uses the past tense, slept, so we'll choose tense, abbreviated as T. And we'll use the annotation for past tense. And the verb phrase here is simple. We just have a single verb, which is sleep. And finally, we'll need to indicate that the tense applies to this verb, which we will do with this arrow. Okay, so that is our first tree, which illustrates the SV pattern. Note that the kind of verb at stake in this sentence type is an intransitive verb. That is, a verb that does not take an object. Other examples of intransitive verbs are shown here, and you'll note that many of these verbs can perform multiple functions. For example, the verb walk can be intransitive in the sentence walked, or it can be transitive in I walked my dog. Now, before going on to SVO, let's look at another sentence pattern. Subject verb complement. Let's look at our first sentence. Hamish is relaxed. To diagram this, let's use the same structural elements as last time. And let's begin by elaborating the noun phrase, which in this case is a proper noun. So we'll just use N for noun to derive the name Hamish. All right, now on to the auxiliary. The verb tense this time is not past but present, and we'll note that here. Next up, the verb phrase. You'll notice that the verb used here is a be verb, often called a linking verb, and sometimes a copular verb. So let's abbreviate this as COP for copular verb. And we'll note here that it is the be verb. And we'll link that up with the tense. So now we just need to account for the adjective relaxed. And to do that, we will generate an adjective phrase, which of course consists of an adjective, which in this case is relaxed. But maybe you're wondering why it's necessary for the adjective phrase to be generated from the verb phrase. Why can't it come from the predicate or the sentence node? Well, it must be generated from the verb phrase because it is required to complete the verb argument. We cannot just say Hamish is. We have to say Hamish is something. But we can also complete this verb argument with a noun phrase. For example, Hamish is a relaxed cat. Now let's compare these two sentences. In the first sentence, we have an adjective phrase, but in the second, it's a noun phrase. Now let's elaborate this noun phrase so that we can see the sentence's surface structure. To account for a relaxed cat, we need to first account for the article a. This is a kind of determiner, so let's use the abbreviation DET to produce a. Next, we'll need an adjective phrase and the adjective relaxed. And a noun phrase must contain a noun, which here is cat. Some other examples of copular verbs used in the SVC pattern include the following. Again, please note that these verbs may not always be used in the SVC pattern. The verb taste, for example, may be used as a linking verb in it tastes good, or it could be used as a transitive verb in the SVO pattern in I tasted the wine. All right, let's do some practice exercises. Use the rules covered in the video for sentence patterns 1 through 2 to diagram these 3 sentences. And here are the answers. Sentence 1, Sentence 2, Sentence 3. Okay, moving on to the next sentence pattern, SVO. This is a comparatively simple pattern, so I'll run through it quickly. Our sentence is, they love boxes. So we'll just begin by elaborating the verb phrase. And you can see we don't use COP for copula here. We use V to indicate it's a regular verb that takes the SVO pattern. And our verb is love. And we'll attach the tense marker. Now we also have the sentence object boxes to account for, so we'll need an NP to generate the noun box. As it's a plural noun, we'll need to mark it for that too. As you can see, this structure implicates the transitive class of verbs, and here's just a small selection of the many verbs in this category. And the usual caveat here is that these verbs may belong to multiple categories. Okay, let's move on to sentence pattern 4, which is a subject and verb with 2 objects. And here's our sentence. I gave them cake. And by the way, this cake is specially made for cats. But you can see we have not 1 but 2 objects to account for, them and cake. And again, we'll just elaborate the verb phrase here, and it's pretty straightforward. For the 2 objects, we just generate 2 noun phrases, like this. And from these we get our 2 objects. And both objects are generated directly from the verb phrase because they are both obligatory elements that are needed to complete the verb argument. We don't just say, I gave him. We need an indirect object, headache, to complete the sentence. And verbs like give that take 2 objects like this are called ditransitive verbs. And some other examples are here. As you can see, these verbs have the core meaning of transfer or convey. Like, he passed him a ball. Okay, let's pass on to the last sentence pattern, which is SVOC. In this pattern, we don't have 2 objects, but rather an object and its complement. And here's our sentence. He got his paw wet. So let's just elaborate the verb phrase here, and we need to account for the phrase, his paw wet. It's a kind of unusual sounding phrase, but we're going to treat it as a noun phrase, just like we would say his wet paw is a noun phrase. So here's our noun phrase, and so now we can generate from that his paw. But his paw is also a noun phrase. So we're left with another noun phrase, and so we'll just do it again. Okay, now we can diagram his paw, which consists of a determiner for his and the noun paw. So now we need to account for the adjective wet, which we can do with an adjective phrase or AP, and the adjective wet. Okay, so that is the SVOC pattern with an adjective as object predicate, but just like SVC, we can use a noun instead of an adjective. What would that look like? Here we have the sentence, I made Ruby a samurai. So we have Ruby a samurai as the object complement. And to be clear, I don't mean I made a samurai for Ruby like a toy or something to play with. I mean I actually made her a samurai, as you can see here and here. All right, let's diagram this. So rather than an adjective phrase, we have a noun phrase. And from this phrase, we can derive the surface structure, a samurai. Now, if you're wondering how this SVOC structure differs from the SVOO structure we looked at previously, there's an easy test. In the first sentence, we have the SVOO pattern, I gave Ruby cake. And in the second, we have our SVOC construction. Let's focus in on the elements in object position. And let's insert a be verb between them. And you can see Ruby is cake doesn't make sense. But Ruby most certainly is a samurai. All right, so those are the 5 basic sentence patterns. And in the Japanese EFL context, these 5 patterns have often been presented to students as the grammatical building blocks upon which increasingly complex constructions can be built. And the key resources for building more complex sentences is the adverbial. The adverbial category is a kind of grab bag of sentence constituents that can be tacked on to the 5 sentence patterns, enabling speakers and writers to communicate more detail and nuance. One simple adverbial is adverb phrases. In the example sentence, you can see very much is just tacked on to the end of an SVO construction. Hamish loves Ruby. And here's the tree diagram. You'll note that this adverbial element is not generated from the verb phrase. That is because very much is not required to complete the verb argument. Instead, it is generated more loosely from the predicate node. Okay, the second adverbial is prepositional phrases like on the floor. Let's look at a diagram of this sentence. And again, we can see that the adverbial, in this case, a prepositional phrase, is derived from the predicate node. And we see the same pattern with the third type, adverbial clauses. As you can see, this is a much more complex adverbial as it is made up of a whole sentence. But like the others, this one attaches to the predicate node. The last group here are just adverbials that are located in sentence initial position, and they're called sentence modifiers because their position at the beginning means they modify the whole sentence. Here's an adverb fortunately as a sentence modifier. You'll note that the adverbial's role as a sentence modifier is indicated with the abbreviation SM. Also, you'll note that after accounting for this sentence modifier, we are still left with the sentence. We will be done soon. And so we simply generate this new sentence from the sentence node. And this goes for other adverbials like the prepositional phrase, in no time, we will be done. As well as, before you know it, we'll be done. Okay, let's turn to some practice exercises. Use the rules covered in the video to diagram these 4 sentences. And here are the answers. Sentence 1, Sentence 2, Sentence 3, and Sentence 4. So before finishing, just a few caveats or things to keep in mind. First, the tree diagrams presented in this video are not intended to be used in the classroom to teach ESL/EFL students. They are for teachers to help visualize how the syntax of English grammar works. Second, the grammar presented here is structural and form-focused. Effective grammar instruction requires a focus on meaning and use, not just form. Okay, that's all for today. Here are my consent forms signed by Hamish and Ruby. Thank you for watching.